So today I want to go over another incredibly strong Stormclaw Druid build for Season 2 of Diablo 4. Now the last build I went over was another Stormclaw Druid, and this is going to be a variation on that I think may actually be better for the highest end of hard content, especially once the Abattoir of Zir is released. I think this version may be a bit better for that. Now with all Stormclaw Druids, the main thing you need for the build to actually work is the Great Staff of the Crone, and its special is Claw is now a storm skill and also casts Storm Strike at 150% of normal damage. So now anytime we cast Claw, it's also casting Storm Strike. Much more damage makes Claw a storm skill, gives it more scaling, meaning you're casting 2 basic skills for every one, giving massive amounts of basic skill damage. And that brings us to our skill tree, starting with 5 points into Claw, which is going to be the main ability we're using. Upgrade 1 gives us increased attack speed, upgrade 2 gives us a chance to be cast twice, and anytime Claw is cast twice, Storm Strike is also cast twice. And then for Storm Strike, we put 5 points into this. It gives us damage reduction. It also cleaves to enemies, giving us some AoE damage. Upgrade 1 has a chance to immobilize. Upgrade 2 can cause enemies to become vulnerable, which is one of the main ways we apply vulnerable. Then we're going down, we're taking Earthen Bulwark, which is just a barrier, so more defensive. Upgrade 1 makes you unstoppable. Upgrade 2 fortifies you. Then we're taking Cyclone Armor, gives non-physical damage reduction. When you activate it, knocks all enemies back and deals some damage. Upgrade 1, when you activate this, it slows enemies. Upgrade 2 gives us damage reduction every 10 seconds. Then we're taking Blood Howl, which is just a big heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown per kill, and Upgrade 2 gives us increased attack speed, so we want to use this on cooldown. Then we're taking Cyclone Armor. This is primarily to proc other effects. Upgrade 1 slows enemies. Upgrade 2 causes enemies to deal less damage. Then we're going down and taking our ultimate, which is one of the big changes of this build. Instead of Cataclysm, like our previous build, we're now using Petrify, which stuns all non-boss enemies, making them take increased critical strike damage, but against bosses, the duration is increased and the critical strike is also increased. And then we're taking Upgrade 1 to increase its duration by 1 second. Now with this build, we can also use Petrify basically anytime we want because we're going to be able to reset its cooldown so much, and because of this build, when we ultimate, it pulls all enemies in, which is going to help with one of the biggest weak points of Stormclaw builds, which is their AoE. Then our ultimate is Earthen Might, which is a lucky hit, has a 5% chance to make all your attacks be guaranteed crits. The chance to proc is doubled for crits and on CC'd enemies, and this is going to be mixed with one of our legendary aspects to allow this to proc on our lightning skills. And then we have our passives with Predatory Instinct, increased critical strike chance to close enemies. We get increased movement speed while in werewolf form. Then we're going down 3 into Ancestral Fortitude to increase your resistances. Then 3 into Vigilance. We gain damage reduction when we use a defensive. We have 3 defensives, so this will be up a majority of the time. Then we're going down 1 into Elemental Exposure. Your storm skills can make enemies vulnerable. This is primarily to get these other points. 2 into Charge Atmosphere. Every 11 seconds a lightning bolt will randomly hit an enemy for some decent damage. 3 into Electric Shock, which is a lucky hit. Dealing lightning damage has a chance to immobilize enemies, but if the target is already immobilized, you deal massively increased damage, and because our Storm Strike has a built-in immobilized chance, this will cause our lightning damage to do a lot more damage. Then 3 into Bad Omen, another lucky hit, up to a 30% chance when damaging a vulnerable or immobilized enemy to also spawn a lightning bolt. And lightning bolts are actually going to be pretty important for proccing some other effects as well. Then we're going down 1 into Neurotoxin to take 1 into Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with werewolf skills cause enemies to be poisoned over 4 seconds. We don't care about poison damage. We only care that they are poisoned. Then 3 into Envenom. You and your companions deal increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. Also have 3 on our necklace for massively increased crit strike damage. Then finally 3 into Defiance. So our nature skills deal increased damage to elites. And also one last thing with our Capstone choice, because I did get a lot of questions about this in my last build on why we're taking Earthen Might over Ursine Strength. Now Ursine Strength would basically just give us 25% increased multiplicative damage because we're healthy most of the time. That'd be the main buff from this, and it would also free up a legendary aspect slot because we don't have to use the legendary aspect to make Earthen Might proc off of lightning skills. Now the reason we're doing this is because we're using a bunch of specific unique items in this build, and some of them don't have crit chance where we would normally have crit chance, and because of how this build works, meaning Storm Strike is cast every time we use Claw, we have a really high lucky hit proc chance, so Earthen Might will be up 80 to 90% of the time you're in combat. If you're on a boss fight, Earthen Might will be procced a majority of the time. So I think overall this is going to be more damage, but if you want to use Ursine Strength instead of Earthen Might, pick that, and then instead of using the aspect where Earthen Might can be procced from our storm skills, you're going to be using Edge Masters aspect, which skills will deal increased damage based off your available primary resource. We don't actually use any resource, so this will just be another 20% multiplicative damage increase. And then next up we have our spirit boons. There's going to be some change in here as well. Wariness, take reduced damage from elite. One of the big changes is we're taking Iron Feather instead of Calm Before the Storm for 14% increased maximum life, so we have a lot more life. We're taking swooping attacks for increased attack speed. We're taking bolster to fortify us for 15% of our life when you use a defensive. Because we don't have a lot of fortify effects in this build, we need the extra fortify from bolster. And then we're taking overload, which is a lucky hit. Dealing lightning damage has a 40% chance to cause a target to emit an AoE of lightning damage for more AoE. And the reason we're taking Iron Feather over Calm Before the Storm, which is a lucky hit to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate, is because in this build we're using Flicker Step. When you evade through enemies, it reduces your ultimate's cooldown by up to 10 seconds. But also on Flicker Step, attacks reduce your evade's cooldown by 1.2 seconds. So we basically use one claw attack and our evade will be instantly reset, meaning if we want our ultimate reproc, we can just evade through a few enemies a few times and we instantly have our ultimate back. So we don't need Calm Before the Storm, so we get more defensives now. And then next up we have our Vampiric Powers, and we have one change here. We're using Hectic instead of Anticipation. Now Anticipation reduces your ultimate cooldown, but it also increases your ultimate damage, which worked really well for our last build where we're using Cataclysm, but Petrify doesn't do any damage. So I think what's going to be better is using Hectic. Every 5 basic skills you cast, one of your active cooldowns is reduced by 2 seconds. So this can be any cooldown. So our ultimate or any of our defensives or Hurricane. Now this will help use any of our other defensives or Hurricane. It'll also help to slowly reduce the cooldown of Petrify, but we mainly get our Petrify back with Flicker Step. So I think this is overall going to be better for this build. Then we're using Undying, casting a skill heals you for 3% of your life. Double this below 50% health, our main sustainability. We have Moonrise, hitting an enemy with a basic skill, grants 4% attack speed for 10 seconds, stacking up to 20% attack speed. Upon reaching max stacks, you gain Vampiric Blood Rage, gaining 160% multiplicative basic skill damage increase and increased movement speed for 10 seconds. This is going to be massive, especially in conjunction with Ravenous, which is a lucky hit, up to a 20% chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your movement speed for 6 seconds. This is currently at 56%. We're also going to be getting more move speed while in combat and in Werewolf, and we'll get more move speed for Moonrise. So this is going to be a massive attack speed increase. Then finally, we have Metamorphosis, which makes our invade make us unstoppable for 4 seconds, and our evade will have no cooldown while in combat, so we can have infinite unstoppable as well. And then next up, we have our Paragon Boards. I'm primarily going to be going over the glyph selection and the board selection, but there'll be build planners in the description if you want to follow point by point. Now, currently, this is pretty much the exact same as my previous build because I don't think there's much that needs to be changed up yet. I do think there's some small optimizations I can do. Once I get all of my glyphs fully leveled up, there may be some small optimizations. So the starter board, we're using Territorial, damage to close enemies, and damage reduction from close enemies. This is a melee build, so you're always close to enemies you're damaging. Then the first board we're taking is Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal more damage based off your damage versus close and damage versus distant. Mine's currently 33% multiplicative damage, which is still pretty big, but I can optimize this more by getting some damage to close rolls on, I think, my ring. And the glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, which is a bonus to all magic nodes within range. This will give us more damage reduction from vulnerable, more storm skill damage, and what's really good about these type of glyphs is you can get more dexterity or intelligence within range to get the secondary effect of rare nodes throughout the boards. The secondary effect of this is nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Then we're going over to the right, we're taking the Heightened Malice board. While 3 or more enemies are poisoned, you deal massively increased damage, and with Toxic Claws, all enemies will be poisoned. Then the glyph we're taking is Fanged Claw, another bonus to magic nodes. So again, you can get an increase to dexterity or intelligence within range. Then we get damage to poisoned and damage reduction from poison. And then while in Werewolf, close enemies take increased damage from you. Then next we're going up, we're taking the Inner Beast board, we're taking the Undaunted glyph, increased damage while fortified, damage reduction while fortified. One of the reasons we're going up first is so we can get the secondary effect of this rare node, which is increased attack speed, but the secondary effect gives us more attack speed, and you want to be getting the increased attack speed for the magic nodes. And then we're going over to the left, we're taking the Electrocution glyph, which increases your lightning bolt and dancing bolt damage, but the secondary effect is enemies damaged by lightning bolts take 20% increased damage from you. That's multiplicative for 5 seconds. And basically all of our lightning bolts are coming from all those passive effects we went over. And one of the bigger changes for when your Paragon boards are going to be fully optimized is you're not going to want to be putting more points into this glyph than just the 40 willpower you need, because the secondary effect of this glyph is massive and will be procced most of the time, but without using Cataclysm, you don't want to put more willpower into this because you don't care as much about scaling your lightning bolt damage. But if you're using Cataclysm, that's going to be spawning more lightning bolts, so you'd want to scale that more. And then we're going down and going over to finish off the board with Lust for Carnage, and the glyph we're taking is Spirit. Increase critical strike damage, and crits increase the damage enemies take from you by 2% up to 12%. So more massively increased multiplicative damage. Make sure to get the increased attack speed, rare, and magic nodes. And then next up we have our gems, our unique items, and our legendary aspects. On your weapon you want basic skill damage, on your gear you want damage reduction while fortified, and on your jewelry you want to make sure you have all of your resistances capped at 70%, so make sure you're using resistance gems in your jewelry to get to that point. If you already have that and you don't need a resistance gem, just use skulls for the increased armor. Now this version of the Stormclaw Druid is going to be using a lot of uniques. Now if you're not at this point, all you need for this build to actually work is going to be Great Staff of the Crown. All of these other uniques are just buffing up the build. So starting off we have Godslayer Crown. When you stun, freeze, or immobilize an enemy or damage a boss, you pull in all enemies, you deal up to 60% increase of multiplicative damage for 3 seconds on a 12-second cooldown. This is massive, and this is the first way we're pulling in enemies, and when not damaging a boss, we have a lot of immobilization. Then we're using Flicker Step, which each enemy you evade through reduces your ultimate cooldown by up to 4 seconds, up to a total of 10 seconds. So each evade can reduce your ultimate by 10 seconds. So this is massive to be able to use Petrify whenever we want. Then we're using Great Staff of the Crone as we went over. Last, we're using the Malignant Heart Ring for the Druid, which when casting an ultimate skill and 5 seconds after, you pull in all distant enemies and you deal some base physical damage to them. Now the base physical damage is increased by 1% multiplicative per willpower you have. Now in this current version of the build, I only have 720 willpower, but with a lot more optimization, specifically getting a percent willpower roll on a necklace and getting max percent willpower roll on this ring, you should be able to get upwards of 900 willpower, which will make this damage proc deal massively increased damage. This damage proc can already deal crits of like up to 300,000 around there, and the damage proc is both when you cast an ultimate and 5 seconds after, and because we can use our ultimate so much, this is going to add a lot of increased damage. Then for our legendary aspects, first off on your necklace, basic skills give increased attack speed, pretty simple. On one of our offensive slots, the other Might Keep passive also applies to your storm skills, as we went over. This is for our capstone. On our other offensive, up to a 20% chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target for 3 seconds, causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse for more AoE damage. This is very important for this build, especially for this version where we have 2 ways to pull in enemies, because you'll pull in all enemies, you'll hit them with say any lightning damage from Hurricane or from your Storm Strike, that will proc this effect, which we have a really high lucky hit, so that'll proc this effect on a bunch of enemies, and then when you AoE hit all of those enemies, it'll also proc this effect on all of those enemies. Since everything's clumped up, this is actually going to deal a lot of AoE damage. This is going to be how you see in the footage where I pull enemies together and you almost instantly kill a full group. This is one of the ways that's done. Then for our defensive aspects, you want basic attacks to give you 20% damage reduction. The roll on this does not matter because all of our damage is from basic skills. Then disobedience, you gain percent armor stacking. And then finally, we have our gear stats. Now, one of the nice things about this version of the build is that once you get all of the uniques, you don't have to worry about those rolls on 4 of your different gear pieces. So super late into the game, that actually becomes pretty nice. But on your chest piece, you want all damage reduction from close, from distant, from poison, from fortified. All damage reduction going to be good. Then on your legs, same thing, except you want a damage reduction while injured roll, and you can get dodge chance, which is also really good. But besides that, damage reduction from fortified, from close, from distant. Then on your gloves, you want attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and any other damage roll. Critical strike chance, lightning damage, any other roll is going to be good. I think critical strike damage with werewolf skills or just critical strike damage is probably going to be the best 4th roll. Then on your necklace, we want move speed, we want ranks 2 and venom passive, and then optimally you want a percent willpower roll for increased damage from willpower and then more damage for our ring proc. But if you don't have that, like I don't have it, just get all damage reduction at the end. Total armor, damage reduction while fortified, or damage reduction from poisoned. Then on a ring, critical strike chance, max life, lucky hit chance, and any other damage roll. I have vulnerable damage, but something like damage to close enemies should be better because that'll also help scale your Thunderstruck legendary Paragon node. But that's the entirety of this version of the Stormclaw Druid, and I think this one may be better for the highest tier of content, like I mentioned, especially doing higher Abattoir of Zir when that's released, specifically because Petrify stuns everything for almost 5 seconds, and because we can have Petrify up so much in all situations besides on a boss, I think this will just be better for surviving. If everything's stunned, they can't damage you. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
Wait a minute.